I'm sitting on the floor of my old bedroom. Everything smells like damp drywall and that weird metallic scent of a house that's been closed up since the 90s. My mum died 3 weeks ago, and now I'm the one stuck cleaning out this tomb. I found it under the floorboards in the closet. Not a box, not a diary, a jar. A heavy glass mason jar caked in black dust. Inside the jar is a tooth, a molar. It's too big to be a kid's tooth, but it's stained this deep, bruised purple, and there is a scrap of paper yellowed and brittle with my own 7-year-old handwriting on it. It just says, "Don't let it hear you remembering." The thing is, I don't remember writing that. I don't remember the jar. I checked the crawl space tonight. You know, that tiny wooden door in the hallway, the one that leads to the pipes. I remember it being maybe 3 feet deep, just a dark hole. But when I pushed the door open, the flashlight beam just kept going. The crawl space isn't 3 feet deep. It's a hallway. A long, narrow hallway lined with the same floral wallpaper as the kitchen, but the flowers are upside down. I heard a sound, like someone dragging a heavy wet towel over a hardwood floor. It was coming from deeper in. I closed the door and locked it, but the lock is on the inside. Why the hell is the lock on the inside of the crawl space? I can't stop looking at the jar. I think the tooth is vibrating. Just a little bit. If I look away and look back, it feels like it's shifted position. I need to leave. I should just go to a hotel, but I can't find my car keys. I left them on the kitchen counter, and now they're gone. The only thing on the counter now is another tooth, identical to the one in the jar. I think I'm starting to remember why we moved away in '99. Or maybe I'm just losing my mind. Wait, I just noticed something. The wallpaper in the crawl space. I said the flowers were upside down, right? I went back to the kitchen to check. The flowers on the kitchen wall. They're moving, not like they're alive, but like a slow-motion video. Every 10 minutes they rotate a few degrees. I am standing in the middle of the kitchen staring at the wall, and I realize I've been standing here for 2 hours. My legs ache. My phone says it is 3 a.m. There is a shadow under the crawl space door. A thin, dark liquid is oozing out from the gap. It smells like copper. I'm going to stay in the living room tonight. I've got a hammer. I don't know what a hammer is going to do against a hallway that shouldn't exist, but it is something. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that dragging sound, scritch, thud, scritch, moving just behind the bedroom wall. It's not a big house, but tonight it felt like it was stretching. The hallways getting thinner, the ceilings dropping an inch every hour. I found the rule book. It wasn't a book, really. Just a piece of cardboard ripped from a cereal box tucked behind the radiator in the hallway. It's my dad's handwriting. He left us when I was 8. Mom always said he just ran out of air. I never knew what that meant until now. There are 3 rules scrawled in thick black marker. 1. Never answer the door if they knock twice. 2. If the kitchen wallpaper is vertical, stay in the light. If you hear your own voice calling from the crawl space, it's already too late. My stomach did a slow flip at the wallpaper in the kitchen. I went back to look. The flowers, they weren't just rotating anymore. They were stretching upward. Long, jagged green stems reaching for the ceiling like drowning arms. Vertical. Then the front door rattled, knock, knock, 2 knocks, sharp, mechanical, like a bone hitting wood. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat, and the house went deathly silent. I remembered the hammer in my hand. I was still gripping it so hard my knuckles were white. Knock, knock. The sound didn't come from the front door this time. It came from the inside of the crawl space door. I backed away, tripping over a loose floorboard. "Who is there?" I croaked. My voice sounded thin, like paper tearing. A voice answered from behind the tiny wooden door. It was soft, muffled by the wood, but unmistakable. "Hey, is anyone there? I think I am stuck. Can you open the door?" It was my voice. Exactly my voice. The same rasp, the same inflection I had when I was a kid. "I found a tooth," the voice said, sounding closer now, right against the crack of the door. "Do you want it back?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just watched that thin, copper-smelling liquid pool under the door. It was starting to form a shape, not a puddle, a footprint. A small, barefoot child's footprint leading away from the door and into the dark kitchen. I checked the kitchen. The light was flickering. Rule 2, stay in the light. But the light was dying. Progress 2,454 thousandths. Expanding, adding psychological decay and fragmented thoughts to maintain retention. I'm losing time. I remember standing by the radiator, and now I'm in the bathroom, staring at the mirror. But it's not my face. It's my face from 20 years ago, covered in dirt, eyes wide and bloodshot. I blinked and it was me again. Just me, pale and shaking. I can't find the hammer anymore. I think I dropped it, or maybe I never had it. My hands are empty and they're covered in that black dust from the jar. The dragging sound is in the ceiling now, scritch, thud. I need to know why Dad wrote those rules. Why didn't he take us with him? Or maybe he did. Maybe the me, standing here, isn't the one who left. I'm back in the kitchen. The light is still buzzing, a sick yellow flicker that makes the shadows of the stretching wallpaper flowers look like long fingers stroking the floor. I didn't find the hammer, but I found something else in the junk drawer under a pile of rusted batteries, an old Polaroid Sunday 600. There was one photo left in the film pack. I don't know why, but I felt this frantic, clawing need to take a picture of the crawl space door. Like if I captured it on film, it would somehow stay fixed, solid click. Whir. The white square spat out. I watched the chemicals swirl and darken, but what crawled out of the grey haze wasn't the hallway. In the photo, the crawl space door is wide open, and standing in the frame is a woman. She's wearing my mother's blue Sunday dress, but her neck is tilted at an angle that should have snapped her spine. Her face is just smooth, no eyes, no mouth. Just a pale, waxen surface where a person should be, and she's holding a child's hand. The child is me. Not the me from the mirror, but the me from the 98 summer photos. Except in the Polaroid, my eyes are entirely black. No whites, no pupils. Just two holes filled with that copper-smelling ink. I looked at the door. It was closed, locked from the inside, just like before. But then I looked at my own hands. In the Polaroid, I am holding a small silver key. I looked down at my real hand. I wasn't holding a key, but my palm felt cold, so cold it burned. I peeled back a layer of skin. I swear, it felt like opening an envelope, and there it was, pushed deep under the meat of my thumb. A silver key. I didn't scream. I think I've forgotten how to. I just grabbed a pair of tweezers from the bathroom and started digging. The pain felt distant, like it was happening to someone in the next room. When the key finally clattered into the sink, the dragging sound started again. Not in the walls, not in the ceiling. It was coming from right behind me, inside the bathroom. Do you remember the basement? My voice whispered from the bathtub, though the shower curtain was pulled shut. We used to hide there when the wallpaper started to reach. I don't remember a basement. This house doesn't have a basement. It's built on a concrete slab. But I looked at the floorboards, and for the first time I noticed a seam. A perfectly rectangular seam right under the bath mat. I don't know where the baby monitor came from. I found it sitting on the edge of the sink after I washed the blood, and that copper ink off the silver key. It's one of those clunky plastic models from the late 80s, off-white, smelling of burnt dust and old batteries. I didn't turn it on. I didn't have to. The speaker crackled to life on its own, spitting out a thick layer of white noise. And then, through the static, I heard breathing. Heavy, wet, rhythmic breathing. Is it open yet? A voice whispered. Not my voice this time. It was Mum's, but it sounded wrong, like her words were being played backward and then stitched together. The key fits the skin, but does it fit the floor? I looked at the silver key. It was trembling in my hand. No, my hand was trembling. I walked back to the bathroom. The baby monitor clutched in my other hand like a talisman. I pushed the bath mat aside. The rectangular seam in the concrete was unmistakable now. It wasn't just a mark, it was a lid. I knelt down, the cold of the floor seeping into my jeans, and felt for a keyhole. There wasn't one. The baby monitor shrieked, a high-pitched feedback loop that made my ears bleed. Under the tongue, the monitor hissed. The hole is under the tongue. I looked at the Polaroid again. The version of me in the photo, the one with the black hole eyes, had its mouth slightly open. I took the silver key and pressed it against the photo, right where the child's mouth was. The photo swallowed it. I felt a sharp, mechanical click vibrate through the floorboards. The concrete slab beneath me didn't lift, it dissolved. It turned into a dark, viscous liquid that looked exactly like the ink from the crawl space. I started to sink. The baby monitor was still screaming, but the sound was changing. It wasn't static anymore. It was the sound of 1,000 teeth grinding against glass. "Welcome home," my own voice said from the darkness below. "We've been keeping your bed warm." I'm neck deep now. The kitchen wallpaper is screaming. I can hear the paper tearing as the flowers grow too big for the walls. I don't remember having a basement, but I am starting to remember what we left down there. The ink wasn't cold. It was warm, like old bathwater, and it didn't feel like liquid as much as it felt like static. My skin buzzed where the darkness touched it. I didn't fall. I drifted down into a space that smelled of wet copper and cedarwood. When my feet finally hit something solid, the ink cleared. I wasn't in a basement. I was in a perfect windowless replica of our 1998 living room. Even the smell was right, the scent of the lemon wax Mom used on the coffee table. But there was one difference. The room was breathing. The walls pulsed in and out, the floral wallpaper stretching and wrinkling like skin over a giant lung. Ha ha ha. Ooh. Every breath released a fine mist of black dust. In the center of the room sat a television, a heavy, wood-paneled floor model. The screen was flickering, showing a video of a birthday party. My 7th birthday. In the video, Dad is holding the camera. You can hear him laughing, but as the camera pans to the cake, I saw it. There were 7 candles, but they weren't made of wax. They were fingers, pale severed fingers stuck into the frosting, their tips lit with tiny blue flames. The me in the video, the 7-year-old me, leaned forward and blew them out. "Did you like the taste?" I spun around. The me from the Polaroid was sitting on the sofa. The one with the black hole eyes, he was holding a jar, the same mason jar I found in the closet, but this one was filled with those flickering blue flames. "Mom said you'd come back once you remembered the taste of the fingers," the boy said. His mouth didn't move when he spoke. The sound came from the pulsing walls. I looked back at the television. The video was changing. It showed Dad now, but he was standing in the crawl space, his face pressed against the upside-down flowers. He looked terrified. He was writing on a piece of cardboard. "Rule 4, I saw him scrawl. If you see the birthday cake, don't eat." The screen went to static. "He ran out of air," the boy whispered, standing up. He started walking toward me, and with every step he grew taller. His limbs stretched, turning thin and jagged like the wallpaper stems. "But you have so much air left in those lungs." The room exhaled one long final breath, and the lights went out. I woke up coughing. My mouth was full of that black dust. It tasted like dry soil and old pennies. I wasn't in the breathing room anymore. I was lying on the floor of the real kitchen, but the sun was hitting the linoleum at an angle that shouldn't exist. The light was green, a thick, stagnant forest green that made everything look like it was underwater. I checked my phone. No signal. The date didn't say 2026. It said the 14th of July, 1998. The back door was open outside. The grass wasn't green. It was that same bruised purple as the tooth in the jar. And there were figures standing in the yard. Dozens of them. They were just standing there facing the house. They didn't have faces, just that smooth, waxen skin I saw in the Polaroid. "They're waiting for the cake," a voice said. I turned. My mom was standing by the stove. She looked normal, beautiful, even, but she was stirring a pot of something that hissed. When she lifted the spoon, it wasn't soup. It was a thick, silver liquid. The same silver as the key I dug out of my hand. "Mom." My voice cracked. "What happened to Dad?" She stopped stirring. Her reflection in the oven door didn't have a face. "Your father didn't understand the 70% rule," she whispered. "He tried to know the other 30. He tried to see the roots of the flowers." She walked toward me, and I realized she wasn't walking. Her feet weren't touching the floor. She was sliding, her body tilting at that same impossible angle from the photo. "We didn't leave in 99, she said, her voice vibrating in my chest. "We just stopped being seen. You are the only one who wandered back into the light. But the light is running out of air." I looked at my hands. They were starting to turn translucent. I could see the silver key inside my thumb again, but it was glowing now. It was a beacon. I remember now. The summer of 98 didn't end because we moved. It ended because the house swallowed the sun. I remember sitting in the crawl space, watching the flowers turn upside down for the first time, and feeling my lungs fill with dust, I ran. I didn't go for the front door. The faceless things were there. I ran for the crawl space. If 70% of this house is a lie, I need to find the 30% that's real. Even if it kills me, the crawl space wasn't a hallway anymore. It was a throat. The walls were wet, pulsing with a rhythmic, subterranean heartbeat that vibrated in my teeth. I was crawling over a floor made of old Polaroids, thousands of them, all showing the same thing, my father's face, but with the features slowly sliding off, like melting wax. I reached the end, and the throat spat me out into a forest. But the trees were growing downward from a sky of solid dirt. The roots tangled above me like nerves, and the leaves were scraps of floral wallpaper, fluttering in a wind that smelled like my mother's perfume and rotting meat. "You are late for dinner," a voice boomed. I looked up or down. I couldn't tell anymore. My parents were there, but they were 20 feet tall, their bodies stitched together from old curtains and discarded memories. Their faces were giant versions of the blank, waxen masks from the photos, but I could hear them breathing. "Hey, hey, ha. We saved you the best part," my mother's voice vibrated through the nerve roots. They dropped something in front of me. It was the birthday cake from '98. The finger. Candles were still burning with that cold blue flame. But now I saw what was underneath the frosting. It wasn't sponge cake, it was a heart, a massive grey heart that beat in sync with the forest. "Eat," my father's voice whispered. "It's the only way to stay in the 70%. I realised then what the silver key was for. It wasn't to open a door. It was a needle. A needle to stitch my shadow to this place so I wouldn't run out of air like Dad did. He refused to eat. He chose the 30%. The absolute dark. The part where there are no rules and no faces. I looked at the heart. I looked at the giant, stitched together monsters that claim to be my parents. If I eat, I become part of this breathing house forever. If I don't, I dissolve into the ink. I felt my reflection, the one with the black hole eyes, standing right behind me. It placed a cold, jagged hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry," it whispered. "I already took a bite for us. I didn't eat it, the silver key. The one I dug out of my thumb. I didn't use it to stitch my shadow. I used it to rip the wallpaper. It wasn't paper. It was cold, wet skin. When the metal tore through the floral pattern, the whole forest, the downward trees, the giant parents, the beating heart, it all started to deflate. The screaming wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, like my own marrow was turning into static. I don't remember climbing out. I just remember the taste of the ink. Now, I'm sitting in a motel room 3 towns away. The sun is up, real sun. It's 2026. My phone works, but I can't stop looking at the drawing I made when I was 7. I found it in my trunk. I don't know how it got there. It's a picture of our old house, but in the drawing, the house has no windows, and there's a figure standing in the yard holding a jar. The figure has my face. Not my 7-year-old face. My current face. The face I have right now sitting in this motel. But here's the thing. In the drawing, I'm holding the jar open. And there isn't just one tooth inside. There are hundreds. I looked in the mirror 10 minutes ago. My mouth felt empty. I touched my gums. My molars are gone. All of them. There's no blood, just smooth, waxen skin where the teeth should be. And then I heard it. Knock, knock. Knocks on the motel room door. Rule number 1, never answer if they knock twice. But then a voice came from the other side. "Honey, it is Mum. I found your keys. Can you let me in? It is getting hard to breathe out here." I'm looking at the door. I'm looking at the drawing. I realized I never finished the drawing. In the corner there is a sketch of a third person. Someone standing behind the me with the jar. The person has no face, but they're wearing my father's watch. A watch I am wearing right now. I'm not opening the door, but the wallpaper in this motel. The cheap beige vinyl. I think the flowers are starting to rotate. We moved into that house in late autumn. I remember the smell of damp leaves and the way the shadows stretched too long across the peeling wallpaper. It was an old suburban box, cheap because the previous owners had left in a hurry. My dad called it a steal. My mum just looked tired. The first thing I noticed was a ghost or a monster. It was just the hallway. "Where's that door go?" I asked, pointing to a blank stretch of wall between my bedroom and the master suite. My dad didn't even look up from his box of tools. Nowhere. Kid, it's just a structural gap, probably plumbing. But the math didn't work. I was 10, obsessed with Legos and floor plans. I walked around the outside of the house. From the backyard, there was a window right there. A small frosted glass window with a white frame, but inside, nothing but a smooth, cold wall covered in beige floral patterns. There. It's a window outside. Dad, I persisted. He stopped then. He looked at the wall, then at me. His face stayed flat, like he was rehearsing a lie. It's a decorative exterior feature. A lot of houses from the 70s did that. It's a dead space. Don't worry about it. I tried to believe him. But that first night, the silence of the new house was broken. Scrape. It was a heavy sound, like a wooden chair being dragged across a hardwood floor. It came from right behind my headboard, right where the dead space was supposed to be. I froze under my covers. The sound was deliberate. Scrape, thud, then the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Not the quick, light steps of a cat or the heavy thumping of my dad. These were slow, measured, bare feet on old wood. Step, step. Pause. I pressed my ear against the wall. The drywall was ice cold. Hello, I whispered. I shouldn't have. I knew it as soon as the word left my mouth. The footsteps stopped right on the other side of the plaster. I could hear breathing. Not a wheeze, not a growl. Just a person. Someone standing inches away from me in a room that didn't exist. Is someone there? My voice cracked. Tap. A single sharp knock against the wall, right against my ear. It was so forceful I felt the vibration in my teeth. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the gap under my bedroom door, waiting for light to spill from a room that was there. When the sun finally came up, I ran outside to look at that window again. It was still there, but the frost on the glass was thick, like it was freezing from the inside out, even though it was 50 degrees outside, and in the corner of the pane there was a smudge. A handprint, small like a child. But with fingers that looked a little too long. I went back inside. My mum was in the kitchen, staring at the wall in the hallway. She had a pencil in her hand, and she was marking a small X on the wallpaper. Mum. She jumped, hiding the pencil behind her back. Just checking for damp, honey. Go eat your cereal. She was lying. I could see her hands shaking. She had heard the chair too, but I didn't. Tell my parents about the handprint on the frosted window. Every time I looked at my mum, I saw the way her eyes darted toward the hallway, and I knew she was already drowning in her own silence. The second night was colder. The heater rattled, but the air near that blank wall felt like it was being sucked into a vacuum. I sat on my bed staring at the beige flowers on the wallpaper, waiting for the chair to move. It didn't move. Instead, there was a sound like a fingernail scratching against a chalkboard. Deliberate. It moved from the ceiling height down to where my head rested against the wall. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and I tapped twice. Knock, knock. The scratching stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against my eardrums. Then from the other side, from that void where no floor should exist, came the reply. Knock, knock, identical. The same force, the same hollow wood sound. My breath hitched. I tried a different pattern. Knock, 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 a beat of silence. Knock, 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 knock. It wasn't an echo. It was a conversation. I felt a sick sort of thrill, the kind you get before a car crash. I started tapping out the rhythm of a song we learned in music class that week. A simple, bouncy nursery rhyme. The neighbour followed perfectly, but as the rhythm reached the end, they added one extra beat. A heavy booming thud that shook the framed picture on my nightstand. I jumped back, pulling the covers to my chin. Who are you? I whispered. No answer. Only the sound of something heavy leaning against the wall. I could feel the drywall bow slightly inward, as if a large weight was pressing from the other side. Then I heard it. A faint, metallic jingle, like keys or a collar. I crept to the hallway. The X my mother had marked was gone. In its place, the wallpaper had been torn, just a tiny sliver, revealing the grey, dusty lath and plaster underneath. There was no light coming through the crack, but there was a smell. It was sharp and sweet, like rotting peaches and ozone. I pressed my eye to the tiny tear in the wallpaper. At first, it was just blackness. Then something moved. A flash of pale white skin. Or maybe fabric passed by the gap. Is someone in there? A voice hissed from behind me. I screamed, spinning around. It was my mother. She looked haggard, her hair a mess, clutching a kitchen knife so tightly. Her knuckles were white. "Mum, I saw. There is nothing in there," she snapped, her voice trembling with a terrifying kind of rage. "We don't talk about that wall. We don't listen to that wall. Do you understand me, Leo?" She had never called me by my full name like that, and she had never looked at me with so much fear. Not fear of me, but fear for me. She grabbed a roll of duct tape from her pocket and began covering the tiny tear in the wallpaper, overlapping the strips until the grey void was buried under silver plastic. She didn't look at me again. She just kept taping, even after the hole was gone. That night, as I lay in the dark, the tapping didn't come from the wall. It came from the floorboards directly under my bed. The silver tape didn't stop the cold. If anything, the hallway felt even more like a tomb after my mother sealed the tear. She stopped cooking. She stopped humming. She just sat in the living room, staring at the television while it hissed with static, her eyes never leaving the hallway. My father was different. He became obsessed with repairs. Every evening after work, he'd be out in the backyard with a ladder, hammering boards over the frosted window. "Just keeping the draft out, Leo," he'd say, his voice flat and rehearsed, but I saw his eyes. They were bloodshot, tracking every movement in the shadows of the garden. That night, the house was so quiet I could hear the house settling, the wood groaning under the weight of something it wasn't built to hold. I stayed awake, my back against the opposite wall of my room, as far from the dead space as possible. Around 3 a.m., the light appeared. It didn't come from my room. It came from the hallway. I crept to my door and cracked it open just a hair. In the pitch black corridor, a thin, brilliant line of gold was bleeding out from under the silver duct tape. It wasn't the flickering light of a candle or the buzz of a dying bulb. It was steady, warm and inviting. It looked like the sun was trapped behind the drywall. Then I heard the sound of a page turning. Flip, followed by a sigh. A soft, contented sigh of someone relaxing after a long day. I forgot my mother's warning. I forgot the knife. I walked toward the silver tape, my hand reaching out. I needed to know. As I got closer, I saw that the light wasn't just leaking from the bottom. It was pulsing. The tape was bulging outward, as if the air pressure in the non-existent room was rising. "Leo." The whisper didn't come from behind the wall. It came from the floorboards. I looked down. Through the narrow gap between the floor and the wall, I saw a sliver of the room beyond. There was a rug, a deep, plush crimson rug that looked expensive. I saw the leg of a mahogany table, and sitting right there, inches from the gap, was a pair of feet. They were bare. The skin was impossibly pale, almost translucent, and the toes were curled as if they were gripping the rug. "Leo, come closer. I have the book you lost," the voice said. It was smooth, like honey poured over gravel. I froze. I hadn't lost a book, but then I remembered the picture book about space I'd misplaced months ago, the one my dad said I must have left at school. "It is right here," the voice urged. A pale hand reached down into my field of vision. The fingers were indeed too long, with extra joints that clicked like dry twigs as they moved. It held the blue corner of my space book. "Just peel the tape, Leo. Just a little bit." I reached for the edge of the silver plastic. My heart was thumping against my ribs so hard it hurt. My fingers brushed the sticky adhesive, cracked. The porch light outside flickered on, flooding the hallway with harsh, artificial white light. The golden glow under the tape vanished instantly. The smell of rotting peaches was replaced by the sharp scent of my father's cigarette smoke. "What are you doing, Leo?" My father was standing at the end of the hall. He wasn't wearing his glasses. His eyes looked like two dark pits in his face. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, silhouetted by the outdoor floodlight. I saw a light, Dad, and my book." His voice wasn't angry, it was empty. "There is no light, there is no book. And if you touch that tape again, we're moving the dresser in front of your door." As I backed away into my room, I looked down at the floor one last time. The crimson rug was gone, but there, resting on the hardwood of our hallway, on our side of the wall, was a single, torn page from my spacebook. It was a picture of the moon, and it was covered in wet, grey ash. The torn page from my spacebook was the final straw. I couldn't trust my eyes anymore, and I certainly couldn't trust my parents. They were moving like ghosts in their own home. their faces pale masks of exhaustion. I stole my dad's old micro-cassette recorder from the garage. It was a clunky thing, usually used for his work memos, but it was sensitive enough to catch a whisper. That afternoon, while my mum was focused on her static-filled television and my dad was fixing the backyard fence for the 10th time, I taped the recorder to the wall in the hallway, right over the silver duct tape. I covered it with a heavy winter coat hanging on the rack to hide it. I let it run for 3 hours. That night, locked in my bathroom with the shower, running to drown out any noise, I pressed play. The first hour was just the hum of the house. The second hour caught the distant sound of my mother sobbing, a dry, rhythmic sound that made my skin crawl. But it was the final 30 minutes that made me drop the recorder into the sink. First, there was the sound of the tape being peeled. Scritch. Then my father's voice. It was cracked, sounding decades older. "We gave you what you wanted. We blocked the window. We stopped the boy from looking. Why are you still scratching?" A silence followed, heavy and vibrating with magnetic interference. Then a response came. It wasn't the honey voice I'd heard under the door. It was a cacophony of whispers, hundreds of them, all speaking at once in a language that sounded like dry leaves skittering on pavement. Amidst the static, one voice rose above the rest. It sounded exactly like mine. "Leo isn't looking anymore." My own voice said through the speakers. "Leo is listening. Leo is right outside the door." I heard my father gasp. Then the sound of a heavy blow, like someone punching the wall. "He's just a child," my father hissed. "Then why does he have the recorder?" the voice replied. My voice, but twisted, each syllable ending in a clicking sound. "Why does he want to know about the other one? About Arthur? Arthur? I didn't know an Arthur. I didn't have a brother, an uncle, or a cousin named Arthur." But the moment the name was spoken, the recording erupted into a deafening screech of feedback that made my ears bleed. I fumbled to turn it off, my hands shaking so hard. I nearly broke the plastic casing. When the silence returned, it was broken by a real sound. Knock, 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 knock. It was coming from the bathroom door. "Leo." My mother's voice whispered from the other side. "Are you in there? Your father wants to talk to you about the hallway, he says. He says it is time to renovate." I looked at the bathroom door. The shadow of her feet under the gap was wrong. The heels were pointing toward the door, but the toes were visible, as if her feet had been twisted 180 degrees. "Leo, open the door. We're going to fix the wall for good. We're going to bring in the bricks." I didn't answer. I backed into the corner of the shower, clutching the recorder, because as she spoke, I heard the scratching start again. But it wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the inside of the bathroom mirror. The renovation didn't feel like an improvement. It felt like a frantic burial. The contractors arrived at 7 a.m. There were 3 of them. Large, quiet men with weathered faces and eyes that never stayed in one place for long. They didn't bring paint or wallpaper. They brought heavy bags of mortar and stacks of grey, cold cinder blocks. My father didn't go to work. He stood at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, watching them like a hawk. He didn't speak to them, and they didn't speak to each other. The only sound was the wet slap of mortar and the heavy clunk of stone on stone. I watched from the doorway of my room as the wall began to rise, covering the silver tape and the beige flowers. The air in the house grew thick. It felt like the oxygen was being traded for something heavier, something that smelled of wet earth and old copper. Ono, the younger workers, a man with a tattoo of a bird on his neck, stopped mid-motion. He was holding a block, his hands trembling. He leaned his ear toward the half-finished wall. "Boss," he whispered, his voice cracking. I think I hear a kid in there." The older contractor didn't even look up. "Keep working, it is just the pipes." "It is not the pipes," the worker insisted. "He is calling a name. He's calling for Arthur." My father moved then. He didn't shout. He just walked over and grabbed the worker's arm with a grip that turned his knuckles white. "There is no one in there. Finish the wall or leave without your pay." The worker looked at my father, then at the wall, and finally at me. The look in his eyes was pure, unadulterated pity. He picked up the block and slammed it into place. By noon, the hallway was a dead end. A raw, ugly slab of grey stone now stood where the dead space used to be. It looked like a tombstone in the middle of our home. But as the mortar was drying, the sound started. It wasn't a tap this time. It was a rhythmic, heavy thudding, as if someone or multiple people were throwing their entire body weight against the other side of the bricks. Thump, thump, thump. The grey blocks actually shifted. A hairline crack appeared in the fresh mortar. The lead contractor packed his tools in a hurry. He didn't even wait for my father to sign the paperwork. "We're done here," he said, his voice a low growl. "Don't call us back. Not for this house." As they fled, I walked up to the new wall. It was cold, freezing to the touch, and behind the stone, the voice returned. It was muffled now, like it was speaking through layers of mud, but I heard it clearly. "Leo, why did you let them build the cage?" It wasn't my voice this time. It was a woman's voice. It sounded like my mother's, but younger, happier. "The bricks won't keep me in, Leo," she whispered, her voice vibrating through the very soles of my feet. "They just keep the others out, and now it is just you and me." I looked back at my parents. They were sitting at the kitchen table, holding hands in the dark. They weren't looking at the wall. They were looking at me. "Is it quiet now, Leo?" my mother asked. Her eyes were blank, reflecting nothing but the grey stone of the wall. "Yes," I lied, my voice shaking. "It is quiet." But as I spoke, I felt something cold brush against my ankle. I looked down. A thin, grey finger was poking through the gap between the new bricks and the floorboards. It was slowly, methodically, tracing my name in the dust. I didn't go back for 15 years. After the wall was bricked up, my parents became shells of people. We moved out 6 months later, leaving half our furniture behind as if fleeing a plague. I never spoke of the house again. My father died of a sudden heart attack when I was 20. My mother followed 2 years later, her mind lost to a dementia that made her scream whenever she saw a grey stone wall. Her last words to me were a frantic whisper, "Leo, don't look at the blueprints, the ink moves." Now I was standing in front of that same suburban box. It looked smaller, shabbier. The garden was a riot of weeds, and the white frame of the frosted window, the one my father had boarded up, was now rotting, the wood soft as wet cake. I had the keys. I had a flashlight. And in my pocket I had the official architectural blueprints I'd pulled from the city archives. I stepped inside. The air was stale, smelling of dust and something metallic. I walked straight to the hallway. The brick wall was still there, but it wasn't grey anymore. It was stained with a dark, oily residue that seemed to seep from the mortar. I took out a measuring tape. According to the official blueprints, the hallway was 20 feet long. My bedroom and the master suite should be adjacent, sharing a single wall. There was no dead space. No room for a closet, let alone a room with a crimson rug. I measured the hallway, 16 feet. I measured it again, 15 feet. The wall was moving, not while I looked at it, but in the blinks. In the moments I turned to check my notes, the hallway was shrinking, the bricks crawling toward me like a slow-motion tidal wave. I pulled out the blueprints. My mother was right. The lines on the paper weren't static. They were vibrating. The space-labelled hallway was slowly being overwritten by a handwritten scroll in a language I couldn't read. Then I saw it. At the bottom of the blueprint in the section for revisions, there was a tiny note dated 3 days before we moved in. Revision 4, internal void successfully contained. Do not provide occupant with a name. Subject, Arthur rejected. Redirecting focus to subject. Leo, my blood turned to ice. Arthur wasn't a brother or a ghost. He was the one who was supposed to be in the void. He was the one who escaped, or was replaced. A soft thump came from behind the bricks. Leo, the voice was perfect now. It wasn't a whisper or a honey trap. It was my own voice. The voice I have now, as a 30-year-old man. Leo, I've been waiting for you to come home. I've grown so much in the dark. Do you want to see? A single brick at eye level began to grind against its neighbours. It wasn't being pushed from the other side. It was being pulled inward. The sledgehammer felt heavy in my hands, a cold iron weight that seemed to vibrate before I even swung it. I didn't care about the property value or the dust. I needed to see crack. The first blow sent a spiderweb of fractures through the grey bricks my father had so desperately laid. I swung again and again. My muscles burned and my breath came in ragged gasps that sounded like the scratching I'd heard as a boy. When the first brick fell away, I didn't see a room. I saw a thick, pulsing layer of what looked like insulation. But it was grey, fibrous, and it moved. It looked like a wall of wet dryer lint mixed with human hair. "Leo, stop," my own voice whispered from inside the mass. It was calm, too calm. I didn't stop. I tore at the grey fibres with my bare hands. They felt oily, leaving a residue on my skin that smelled of copper and old paper. As I peeled back the last of the insulation, I finally broke through to the other side. The room wasn't empty. It was an exact replica of my childhood bedroom, but everything was slightly wrong. The proportions were skewed. The bed was too long, the desk was too low, and the window, the frosted window, was letting in a light that wasn't sunlight. It was a pale, flickering violet glow. Sitting on the edge of the bed was a figure. It was dressed in the same clothes I was wearing now, a flannel shirt and dark jeans, but its back was turned to me. "You were never the one who lived out there, Leo," the figure said without moving its head. "You were just the version they could handle, the one who didn't click when he walked." I looked down at my hands. Under the oily grey residue, my knuckles were beginning to swell. I flexed my fingers and I heard it, a sharp, dry click of extra joints that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. I scanned the room for Arthur. I found him in the corner. Or rather, I found what was left. There was a small wooden chair, the one I'd heard being dragged for years. On the chair sat a pile of space books, all of them missing their pages. And pinned to the wall above the chair was a photograph. It was my family, my mum, my dad, and 2 identical boys. But one boy had been carefully scratched out with a fingernail, leaving only a jagged white void in the paper. "The revision was successful," the voice from the bed said. The figure began to stand up, its limbs unfolding with sickening spider. Like Grace, it turned around, and I saw my own face, but the eyes were nothing more than frosted glass, cold and unseeing. "But the blueprint is still moving, Leo, and it is time for the final edit." The house groaned. The walls of the replica room began to bleed inward, the hallway outside shrinking until there was no exit left. I wasn't in a room anymore. I was inside a lung, and it was starting to exhale. The replica room began to fold, not like paper but like skin, stretching and tearing until the hallway of my childhood home was just a narrow, dark throat, leading nowhere. My double, the thing with my face and frosted, glass eyes, stepped closer. Its movements were fluid, lacking the weight of a human body. "The revision is complete, Leo. You've seen what's behind the wall. You've touched the grey fibre. You don't fit the ink anymore." I turned to run, but the floor was no longer wood. It was soft, vibrating with that same humming sound I'd heard through the tape. My feet sank into the surface. I looked down, and my shoes were gone, not removed, but merged into the floor, turning into grey, fibrous stalks. "What am I?" I screamed, but the sound didn't come from my mouth. It came from the walls. "You are revision 4, the other Leo said, his voice now a chorus of thousands. "And I am the master copy. I am the one who gets to leave." He walked past me, his extra joints clicking in a rhythmic, terrifying melody. Click, click, click. He stepped through the hole I had hammered in the bricks, moving into the real hallway of the house. From where I was rooted, I watched him reach into his pocket and pull out my car keys. "Wait." I tried to reach out, but my arm stayed extended, the skin turning the colour of grey cinder blocks. He paused at the end of the hall and looked back. For a second, the glass in his eyes cleared, and I saw a glimpse of something ancient and hungry. "Don't worry, Leo. The next family is moving in on Tuesday. They have a daughter, I think. I think she'll like the sound of your tapping." He turned the corner and the front door slammed shut. The violet light in the room grew blinding. I felt the house exhaling one last time, and then the space between the bricks and the replica room snapped shut. The darkness was absolute. I am sitting on the crimson rug now. It feels like wet hair. I have found the space book, and I am tearing out the pages one by one to see if the sound of the paper will remind me of who I was. Scrape. I heard it, a heavy sound from the other side of the wall. Scrape. Someone is moving a chair in the hallway. Someone is measuring the space between the rooms. I reach out my long, multi-jointed fingers and touch the cold surface of the bricks. I don't want to be a monster. I just want someone to know I am here. I lift my hand. I find the spot where I used to sleep as a boy. Tap. I wait. Tap, tap. A response. The cycle has begun again. But as I press my face against the cracks in the mortar, I realize something that makes me want to scream until the house collapses. The person tapping on the other side isn't a child. It is the sound of a hammer, and they aren't trying to hear me. They are building another wall. I still remember the smell of that mud, It wasn't the dry, dusty dirt from the suburban sidewalk outside our house. It was heavy, damp. It smelled like a swamp, or maybe a grave that hadn't been closed right. I was 10. It started with my sneakers, those blue Velcro ones with the worn-out toes because I kept dragging my feet. One morning, I went to the mudroom to get ready for school. I reached for my shoes. They were there, under the bench, and then right next to them was another pair. Exactly the same size, same frayed blue Velcro, same scuff marks on the left toe. I just stood there. My brain kind of stalled. I thought maybe my mum bought a backup pair, but why would she buy shoes that were already worn out? I picked one up. It was cold, not just house, at night cold, but like it had been sitting in a freezer. "Mom," I called out. She was in the kitchen, the sound of the toaster clicking down. She didn't even look up when I walked in holding the extra shoe. "Did you buy me new ones? Or find these?" I asked. She looked at the shoe. Her face didn't change. No surprise. No. Oh, where did that come from? She just stared through it. "Put your shoes on, Leo. You're going to be late," she said. Her voice was flat, like she was reading a weather report for a city she didn't live in. "But there's 2 of them, 2 pairs, look." She finally looked at me. Not the shoe. Me. "There is 1 pair of shoes under the bench, Leo. Don't start this again." Again, I hadn't even started it the first time. I went back to the mudroom. My heart was thumping in that weird, hollow way it does when you know something is wrong, but everyone is acting like it is fine. I looked under the bench. 4 shoes, 2 lefts, 2 rights. I put on my real pair, the ones I recognized. I took the other pair and hid them behind a stack of old newspapers in the corner of the garage. I told myself I was just being smart. When I came home from school that afternoon, I checked the garage. The newspapers hadn't been moved. The extra shoes were gone. I felt a rush of relief. See, my dad probably found them and threw them out. Or I imagined it. Kids have weird brains, right? I went to the mudroom to take off my school shoes. There, under the bench, were 2 pairs. The ones I just took off, and the ones I thought I hid in the garage. But these weren't clean anymore. They were covered in thick black muck, and there was a single long strand of dark hair caught in the Velcro. I didn't have long hair. My mum was blonde. My dad was bald. I looked at the muck. It was dripping onto the floor. I looked at the kitchen door. It was closed. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like it is holding its breath, waiting for you to notice the thing standing right behind you. Wait. I need to ensure the word count target is met. Let me expand the internal monologue and the interaction with the environment. The hair. I touched it. It felt like wire. It didn't belong to anyone I knew. I tried to pull it out of the Velcro, but it was tangled deep in the plastic hooks. The more I pulled, the more I felt this vibration. Not a sound, but a feeling in my teeth, like a low-frequency hum. I shoved the muddy shoes into the bottom of the shoe rack, way in the back where the spiders lived. I didn't tell my dad when he got home. He was a big man, worked in construction, didn't have time for ghost stories. At dinner, he kept dropping his fork. Clink, clink. He looked tired. His eyes were bloodshot. "Everything okay at work, Dad?" I muttered. He didn't look at me. He looked at the empty chair at the end of the table. "The site is fine, just floors are uneven. You think you are walking on flat ground, but your foot lands lower than it should, messes with your knees." I thought about the extra shoes. I thought about the muck. That night, I woke up because I heard a sound. It wasn't a scream or a crash. It was the sound of Velcro. Rip, rip, slow, methodical. Someone was opening and closing my shoes over and over. It was coming from the hallway, just outside my bedroom door. I stayed under my covers. I was sweating. The air in the room felt thick like syrup. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I crept to the door and cracked it open. The hallway was dark. The moonlight from the window at the end of the hall hit the floor. There was nothing there, but then I saw it, at the very edge of the carpet. A wet footprint, small, my size. And then another one appeared, out of nowhere, like an invisible foot had just stepped down. Then another. They were walking away from my room toward the stairs. I followed. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I caught it, the game would end. I reached the top of the stairs and looked down into the mudroom. The back door was cracked open, just a sliver, and there, lined up in a perfect straight row across the kitchen floor, were shoes. Not just 2 pairs, 6 pairs. 12 blue sneakers, all with the same worn-out toes, all covered in that black, stinking mud. They formed a path leading directly to the basement door, and the basement door was swinging just a little bit back and forth. I didn't go down there. I ran back to my room and locked the door. I pushed my dresser in front of it. I sat on my bed and waited for the sun. When morning came, the dresser was still there. But when I moved it and went downstairs, the kitchen floor was spotless. No mud, no shoes. Just my 1 pair sitting under the bench. They were dry. They were clean. But when I put my foot inside the right one, I felt something sharp. I pulled the shoe off and turned it over. A small, jagged piece of a fingernail fell out. It was too thick to be mine. It was grey. I stared at that grey sliver on the floor. It didn't look like a human nail. It looked like a scale. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it was full of dry wool. I looked up and saw my mum standing in the doorway of the kitchen. She was holding a sponge. She was scrubbing the counter. But there was nothing on the counter. She was just scrubbing the same spot over and over until the laminate was starting to dull. "Mom," I whispered, "look at this." She didn't stop scrubbing. "Breakfast is on the table, Leo. Eat your eggs." I looked at the table. There were 2 plates of eggs, one in front of my chair and one in front of the empty chair at the end of the table. "Who is that for?" She finally stopped. The sound of the sponge died. She looked at the empty chair, and for a split second her eyes went wide. Not with fear, but with a kind of recognition, like she was looking at a long-lost friend. "It is for your brother," she said. My heart stopped. I don't have a brother. She went back to scrubbing. "Of course you do. He doesn't come inside much. He likes the garden. He likes the mud." I backed away. My backpack felt like it was filled with lead. I grabbed my shoes, my 1 pair, and ran out the front door. I didn't even tie them. I ran until my lungs burned. I spent the whole day at school looking at everyone's feet. I was looking for blue sneakers. I was looking for grey fingernails. But the worst part wasn't school. The worst part was when I got home. I walked into the mudroom. I was terrified of what I'd see, but it was just my shoes, the ones I had worn to school. I took them off. I put them under the bench. I went to my room to do my homework. I was sitting at my desk when I heard a soft thud from under my bed. I froze. Slowly, I leaned over. I looked under the bed frame. There was a pair of blue sneakers. They were brand new. No scuffs, no mud, no grey nails. But as I watched, a scuff mark appeared on the left toe, right in front of my eyes, like an invisible hand had just scraped it against the floor. Then the Velcro unfastened itself. Rip. Something was putting them on. I scrambled back, hitting my head against the desk. The shoes stayed there, tucked under the dark shadows of the bed skirts. They looked heavy now, occupied. The fabric of the sneakers was bulging slightly, as if being stretched by a foot that was just a little too wide for the mold. "Who is there?" I choked out. The only answer was the sound of breathing, but it wasn't coming from under the bed. It was coming from the wall behind me. A wet, rhythmic wheezing. I didn't stay. I didn't check. I bolted for the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet. I spent the rest of the evening in the living room, sitting as close to my father as I could. He was watching the news, the blue light of the television reflecting in his glassy eyes. He didn't say a word to me. He didn't even acknowledge I was there. He just kept rubbing his ankles, over and over, his hands circling the bone. When I finally went back to my room, I kept the lights on. I didn't look under the bed. I didn't look in the closet. I fell asleep with my clothes on. In my dreams, I was running through a forest of giant shoes, thousands of them, all blue, all scuffed, and behind me, I could hear the sound of 1,000 Velcro straps opening at once. Rip, rip. I woke up at 3 a.m. The house was freezing. I looked down at the floor. My bed was surrounded. There were dozens of them, blue sneakers. Some were muddy. Some were brand new. Some were shredded as if they'd been dragged behind a car for miles. They were all pointed toward my bed. A circle of empty shoes waiting for a circle of empty feet. And in the center of the room, standing right at the foot of my bed, was a pair of boots. Work boots. My dad's boots. They were covered in the same black muck. And from the top of the left boot, a single grey finger was sticking out, pointing straight at my chest. I didn't sleep much after the fingernail incident. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear that dry plastic rip of Velcro. The next morning, the boots were gone. My dad had already left for the site, and my mum was humming in the garden, burying dead marigolds in the dirt. I looked at my shoes under the bench. They were there, just one pair. But when I picked them up, they felt heavy, like they were full of lead. I turned them over. The treads were packed solid with bright red clay. We don't have red clay in our town. Our dirt is grey, sandy, and full of half-rotted pine needles. This stuff was thick, oily, and smelled like iron, and stuck in the clay were these tiny blue wildflowers I'd never seen before. They were still fresh, petals trembling as if they'd just been plucked from a field. "Leo bus," my mum yelled from the yard. I shoved my feet into the damp, heavy sneakers. They felt cold and small. It felt like someone else's feet had already spent the whole night stretching them out. At school, I couldn't focus. I kept looking at the floor. Every time I moved my feet, a little clump of that red clay would fall onto the linoleum. By lunch, there was a small pile of foreign earth under my desk. "Hey Leo," my friend Sam said, kicking at the red dirt. "Where'd you go, Georgia?" "I didn't go anywhere," I snapped. "Well, your shoes did," Sam pointed out. "Look." I looked down. On the side of my right sneaker, written in black permanent marker, which definitely wasn't there this morning, were 4 numbers, 42.88. I tried to rub it off with my thumb, but the ink felt like it was part of the fabric now. It wasn't just a scribble, it looked like part of a coordinate. When I got home, I didn't go inside. I went straight to the garage and grabbed my dad's old atlas. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly tore the pages. I looked up the coordinates for our area. Then I started looking for red clay. I found a spot, about 50 miles north, an old quarry that had been closed since the 70s because the ground was unstable. I looked at my shoes again. There were more numbers now, minus 78.12. The full set. I stared at the map. That point wasn't just in the quarry. It was a specific spot in the middle of a swampy patch of woods nearby. That night, I decided to stay awake. I tied my shoes to my bedpost with a thick nylon rope. I wanted to see who or what was taking them. I waited. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. The house was silent except for the sound of my mum talking in her sleep downstairs. She was saying a name I didn't recognize. "Elias. Stay in the shade, Elias." Then I felt a tug. The bedpost creaked. The nylon rope began to stretch, pulling tight toward the bedroom door. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't see a shadow, but the shoes were moving. They were being pulled through the air, the rope straining until it snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The shoes hit the floor with a heavy thud, and then they started to walk. Empty blue Velcro sneakers, walking toward the door with a heavy rhythmic gait. Stomp, 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 as if someone invisible was wearing them, someone who walked with a limp. The smell in the basement had shifted. It was no longer the scent of old laundry and concrete. It was the metallic, cloying stench of wet iron and rotting vegetation. I stood by the washing machine, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Leo, what are you doing down there?" My mum's voice drifted down the stairs. It sounded wrong, too airy, as if she were whistling while she spoke. I didn't answer. I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the reflection in the side of the chrome dryer. Behind me, a figure stood in the shadows. It was impossibly thin, its limbs elongated like pulled taffy, but it was the feet that made my skin crawl. It didn't have heels. The back of its feet tapered off into sharp, bony points that hovered inches above the floor. It stood entirely on its forefeet, which were wide and splayed, with toes that looked more like talons. This wasn't a human foot. It was a structure built for gripping soft, unstable earth, like the red clay of the quarry. I slowly turned around. The thing was holding a pair of my blue sneakers. It was trying to force its wide heel, less foot into the narrow opening. I heard the fabric groan. I heard the rip of the Velcro being strained to its limit. "Elias," I whispered, my voice cracking. The figure tilted its head. It didn't have a face, just a smooth expanse of grey, shimmering skin that looked like the scales I'd found in my shoe. It made a sound, a wet, clicking noise like a tongue hitting the roof of a mouth. Then it took a step. It didn't walk, it lurched because it had no heels to balance on. It moved with a predatory, springy gait, staying high on its toes. Each time its foot hit the concrete, it left a partial print, just the wide, clawed front and the deep gouges of its nails. It reached out a spindly arm, offering me the shoe. The sneaker was bulging in the middle, its shape completely ruined by the thing's anatomy. Inside the shoe I could see something moving, something grey and wet, pulsing like a heart. Leo. My mum was halfway down the stairs now. The thing didn't panic. It simply collapsed. Its bones seemed to liquefy, and it folded itself into the shadows between the washer and the wall. In its place remained only a pile of muddy blue fabric. My mum stepped onto the basement floor. She walked right past the spot where the thing had stood. "I told you to keep your shoes in the mudroom, honey. Look at this mess." She picked up the distorted sneaker, the one Elias had just been trying on. "Mom, wait, don't touch it," I yelled. She looked at the shoe, then at me. Her expression was blank, but her thumb was tracing the grey, scaly texture that was now growing over the Nike logo. "It is just a shoe, Leo," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "It just needs to be broken in." I didn't scream. I couldn't. My vocal cords felt like they'd been coated in the same thick red mud that filled the washing machine. I just stood there, paralysed, watching the reflection of the tall, spindly figure leaning over me. The blue sneaker, the one that had been shredded and rebuilt with grey scales, descended toward my head like a predator's jaw. At the last second, I threw myself sideways. My shoulder slammed into the cold, damp concrete floor. I scrambled back, my hands slipping in the puddles of red water leaking from the washer. "Elias," I choked out. The figure didn't answer. It didn't have a face, not really. Where eyes should have been, there were only deep folds of grey, overlapping skin, like the scales inside the shoes. It stood at least 7 feet tall, but its limbs were as thin as dry branches. It wasn't wearing clothes. Its skin was a mottled patchwork of blue canvas and red clay. It moved with a sickening, twitching grace, staying high on those heel-less feet. Click, 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 its toenails, long grey and jagged, tapped against the floor. It held up the shoe. It wanted me to wear it. It wanted to match me. I backed toward the stairs, but my foot hit something soft. I looked down. It was a pile of shoes, hundreds of them, not just mine. I saw my dad's work boots, my mum's Sunday heels, all of them being processed, covered in mud, leaking grey scales, their shapes twisting into something unholy. "Leo, are you talking to yourself again?" My dad's voice boomed from the kitchen above. The basement door creaked open. The thing, Elias, didn't flinch. It just turned its head toward the sound, its neck snapping with a series of loud, wet pops. Then, it did something worse than attacking me. It started to shrink. In a blur of motion, it folded its long, spindly limbs. It collapsed in on itself like a piece of complex origami. Within seconds, it had transformed into a pile of discarded, muddy blue sneakers sitting harmlessly on the floor. My dad walked down the steps, his face dark with irritation. He looked at me, then at the pile of shoes. "I told you to clean this mess up, Leo," he growled. He walked over and kicked the pile. I wanted to yell, to tell him that he was kicking a monster, but as his boot hit the sneakers, I heard it. A soft, muffled grunt of pain. Not from my dad. From the shoes, my dad didn't notice. He grabbed one of the blue sneakers, the one with the grey scales, and tossed it into the trash can. "If you can't take care of your things, you don't get to keep them." He turned and left. I stayed in the dark, watching the trash can. The lid began to rattle. Slowly, a hand-long grey and dripping with red mud reached out from under the lid and gripped the rim. But it wasn't trying to get out. It was pulling something in. I didn't put the shoes on. I ran. I bolted past my father, his cold hands grazing my neck like wet silt, and locked myself in the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the tub, gasping for air that tasted like old, damp copper. I looked down at my own feet. My real sneakers, the ones I'd worn to school, were sitting by the door. I pulled them toward me, desperate for something familiar. But when I reached inside to check for surprises, my fingers hit something hard and jagged. I turned the shoe over and shook it. Out fell a cluster of grey, translucent shards. They looked like fingernails, but they were curved and sharp, like the talons I'd seen on the figure in the basement. Then I saw the inside of the shoe. The arch support wasn't foam anymore. It was made of bone. A thick white ridge had grown directly out of the rubber sole, shaped perfectly to fit a foot that didn't have a heel. It was a mould for a monster, A soft knock came at the door. Tap, tap, tap. It was low, near the floor. "Leah," my mother's voice whispered through the wood. "Your father is worried you're being inconsistent. We all need to match for the trip." "I am not matching anything," I screamed. "The shoes are just the beginning, Leo," she said, and I could hear her breathing, a wet, whistling sound right against the keyhole. "The house is already wearing its new skin. Why are you fighting yours?" I looked at the bathroom floor. The white tiles were usually cold and smooth, but as I watched, a thin layer of red mud began to seep from the grout. It wasn't coming from a pipe. The floor was sweating it. I grabbed a towel and tried to wipe it away, but the fabric of the towel felt weirdly stiff. I looked closer. The cotton fibers were being replaced by tiny blue polyester threads, the same material as the sneakers. The house wasn't just being haunted. It was being consumed and rebuilt into a giant version of the thing in the basement. Every rug, every curtain, every piece of clothing was turning into blue canvas and grey scales. I realized then that if I stayed here, I wouldn't just be wearing the shoes. I would become part of the collection. Saba. I looked at the small frosted window above the tub. It was the only way out. I scrambled up, pushing it open. The air outside was freezing, and the moon was a sharp, pale sliver. But as I looked down into the yard, my heart stopped. The grass wasn't green anymore. It was a sea of red clay, and standing in the middle of the yard, perfectly still, were hundreds of pairs of shoes. Boots, sneakers, heels, all pointed toward the house, and they were all waiting for someone to step into them. The entire neighborhood is shifting into a vast red clay cemetery of footwear, and Leo is staring at a biological blueprint for a monster inside his own shoe. In Chapter 6, we'll explore the collapse of the family unit as the assimilation reaches its peak. I didn't use the stairs. I knew the wood of the steps would feel like skin under my socks. I climbed out the bathroom window, my fingers gripping the siding of the house. The plastic felt wrong, supple and warm, like it was made of the same blue canvas as the sneakers. I dropped into the red mud of the yard with a wet thud. The shoes in the yard didn't move, but I could hear them, a collective, rhythmic wheezing coming from hundreds of rubber soles. "Leo, where are you going?" I turned. My mother was standing on the back porch. She wasn't holding a sponge or a plate of eggs anymore. She was holding a large, dusty wooden box. "The collection isn't finished," she said. Her jaw didn't move when she spoke. The sound seemed to vibrate out of her throat. "Elias needs the archives." I backed away, my feet sinking into the clay. "There is no Elias, Mom. Whatever is in that box, it isn't a brother." She opened the lid. I expected bones or old clothes. Instead, the box was filled with photographs, thousands of them. I grabbed a handful as she stepped off the porch, her movements jerky and heel-less. I looked at the first photo. It was a picture of me at my 5th birthday party. I was blowing out candles, but in the dark corner of the living room behind the sofa, there was an extra pair of legs. They were long, spindly, and ended in blue sneakers. I flipped to the next one, my parents at the beach. In the reflection of my dad's sunglasses, I could see a tall, grey figure standing right behind the camera, holding a pair of shoes. Every single memory of my life had been shadowed by this thing. It hadn't just arrived, it had been harvesting us for years, one scuff mark and one grey scale at a time. "He was always the quiet one," my mother whispered, now only a few feet away. "He didn't have a body of his own, so we gave him our discarded pieces. A fingernail here, a bit of skin there, and all those shoes you outgrew." I looked at her face. A grey scale was peeling away from her cheek, revealing a layer of blue fabric underneath. She wasn't being replaced. She was being unraveled and rewoven. "Dad," I called out, looking toward the house. My father was standing in the kitchen window. He wasn't looking at me, he was staring at his own hands. He began to pull at his skin, and it unzipped with the unmistakable sound of Velcro rip. I realized then that the human element was gone. They weren't fighting the cognitive shield, they were the shield. I turned and ran toward the edge of the property, toward the woods that led to the quarry. The coordinates in my head, 42.88 minus 78.12, felt like a physical weight pulling at my brain. As I reached the tree line, I looked back. The house wasn't a house anymore. It had folded in on itself, its sharp angles softening into a massive, house-sized shape of a blue sneaker, the windows acting as eyelets, the front door a gaping, open tongue, and it was starting to walk. The woods didn't feel like a forest anymore. The trees were slick, their bark replaced by a tight-ribbed material that looked like the sides of a high-top sneaker. I tripped over a root, but it didn't snap. It stretched like an old elastic lace. Every step I took toward the coordinates 42.88 minus 78.12 felt like I was walking deeper into the throat of a giant. I reached the edge of the quarry. In the moonlight, the pit looked like a massive, jagged wound in the earth. The red clay at the bottom was churning, bubbling with a slow, rhythmic pulse. And then I saw it, the house. It had finished its walk. It sat at the very center of the pit, its blue canvas walls quivering. But it wasn't a house anymore. It had flattened into a massive 2-story tall soul. My parents were there too. They weren't standing. They were being pressed into the clay by invisible weights. "Leo," a voice boomed. It wasn't my mother or my father. It was 1,000 Velcro straps opening at once. I looked up. Suspended above the quarry by thick blue cables of braided thread was the mold. It was a gargantuan grey stone slab carved into the perfect hollow shape of a foot, but it had no heel. It was the shape Elias had been trying to achieve in the basement. "The collection is incomplete," the voice hissed from the red mud. "We have the history, we have the house, we have the providers, but we lack the air." I saw my father then. He was fused into the clay, his face a distorted mask of grey scales. He held out a hand, but his fingers had merged into a single pointed talon. "Jump, Leo," he wheezed. "It doesn't hurt once the laces are tied. You'll never have to walk on the ground again. We'll be the shoe that walks between worlds." The giant mold began to descend, creaking under its own impossible weight. I looked at the coordinates on my arm. They were glowing now, a sickly blue light beneath my skin. I realized the coordinates weren't a location I was supposed to find. They were the serial number for the thing I was becoming. I wasn't the victim. I was the final piece of the pair. I backed away from the ledge, but the ground behind me began to rise. The forest was folding in. The trees were leaning down, their laces lashing out to grab my ankles. There was no exit. The entire landscape was a box, and the lid was closing. I haven't been back to the quarry in 20 years. I live in a city now, a place of steel and glass where the ground is always covered in sterile grey asphalt, no red clay, no blue canvas. I wear expensive leather shoes with hard, flat heels that click loudly on the pavement. I need that sound. It reminds me that my weight is still where it belongs. After that night at the quarry, the house was gone. The police called it a sinkhole. They never found my parents. They said the earth simply opened up and swallowed the foundation. I was found wandering the highway, barefoot, my feet bleeding and caked in a mud that the lab technicians couldn't identify. Today, I was cleaning out my storage unit when I found the wooden box again, my mother's archives. I sat on the cold floor and began to spread the photos out. I was looking for the gaps, the 30% of my life that I still couldn't explain. Why did it start with the shoes? Was Elias a person we lost? Or was he something the earth created to fill the void of a family that didn't know how to love each other? I found a photo I'd never seen before. It was a Polaroid of my father, taken years before I was born. He was standing in front of his first construction site, the quarry. He looked happy. But in his hand, he was clutching a tiny infant-sized blue sneaker. And on the back, in his heavy handwriting, it said, "The first seed is planted." The realization hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't a haunting, it was a harvest. My family hadn't been victims, they were the farmers. We didn't find the shoes, we grew them. A soft thud came from the hallway outside my unit. I froze. My heart began to drum against my ribs. I slowly stood up and walked to the metal door. I slid it open just an inch. There, in the middle of the fluorescent-lit corridor, was a single pair of shoes. They were blue Velcro sneakers, small toddler-sized. They were covered in fresh, wet red clay that was already beginning to stain the concrete. And as I watched, the Velcro straps began to pull apart, making that slow, agonizing sound of plastic hooks being forced open. Rip, rip. I backed into my unit, but my foot hit something soft. I looked down. My expensive leather shoes were gone. In their place were two grey, scaly messes shaped like feet, but they had no heels. They were already beginning to pulse, turning blue as the canvas skin grew over my ankles. The cycle wasn't just in the photos, it was in the blood. I looked at the door one last time. The small blue sneakers weren't empty anymore. A pair of tiny, grey, Clawed hands reached out from the shadows of the hallway and gripped the door frame. "Daddy," a whistling voice whispered. The lid of the world was closing again, and this time I was the one who had to tie the laces. So the story ends here. Some sounds in the dark are still quietly echoing. If it gave you chills, hit like, and maybe share it with friends brave enough to face the fear. Subscribe to Vanthara. The next unknown story might be waiting for you in the night. Drop a comment. Tell me what scared you the most tonight, and maybe, next time, it'll become a new story.